In 1947, the chief engineer of the Rover Car Company needed a vehicle for his farm. This was a man who had spent the war building jet engines, one of the most capable engineers in Britain, and when his brother asked him what he'd buy, his answer was humiliating: an American Jeep, because in his exact words, there isn't anything else. No British company on earth made a vehicle that could do the job. So he knelt down on a beach in Wales, drew a picture in the wet sand, and accidentally created the most produced British 4x4 in history. This is the story of how Land Rover accidentally created the Defender. To understand it, you have to understand Britain in 1947. The war had been over for 2 years, and the country was broke. Food was still rationed, petrol was still rationed, and critically, for anyone trying to build cars, steel was still rationed. The government controlled every sheet of it, and there was a rule. Steel went to companies that could export. If you could sell products abroad and bring foreign currency into Britain, you got your allocation. If you couldn't, you got nothing. The Rover Company was in serious trouble under this system. Rover built refined, comfortable saloon cars for the British middle class. Doctors drove them. Solicitors drove them. Almost nobody outside Britain drove them. Rover had a large factory in Solihull that had built aircraft engines during the war, and now that factory was sitting there, half empty, with no export product and no steel allocation coming. The company needed something it could sell to the world. And the answer came from a beach in Wales. The engineer from our opening was Maurice Wilks, and he had been Rover's chief engineer since 1930. During the war, he led the Rover team that worked on Frank Whittle's jet engine, one of the most advanced engineering projects on the planet. Yet on his farm on the island of Anglesey, off the coast of North Wales, all that expertise counted for nothing. The work there needed a machine that could tow, climb, haul, and cross rough ground, and the only thing on earth that could do it was his battered, war-surplus Willys Jeep. Thousands of them had been left behind in Britain after the war, and Maurice had bought one because he had no other option. The brother who asked the question was Spencer Wilks, Rover's managing director, and the exchange between them mattered because Spencer wasn't asking as a brother. He was asking as the man running a car company with an empty factory and no export product. Maurice's answer told him two things at once. There was a hole in the market, and the hole was global. Every farmer in Britain had the same problem. So did every farmer in Australia, Africa, and across the Commonwealth. Millions of potential customers and no British product to sell them. The legend says the moment happened at Red Wharf Bay on Anglesey, the two brothers walking the beach, Maurice kneeling down and scratching the outline of the vehicle into the wet sand. A British Jeep, simple, tough, and built for export. It is one of the most famous drawings in automotive history, and the tide washed it away within hours. What happened next moved at a speed that is almost impossible to imagine today. The idea was presented to the Rover board in the autumn of 1947 and approved. 50 pre-production vehicles were sanctioned that September. From sketch in the sand to board approval took months. Modern car programs take 5 years. This one took 1. The very first prototype was built directly on a Jeep chassis using Rover running gear, and it had one of the strangest features ever put on a British vehicle. The steering wheel was in the middle. The thinking was that a center steering position would work for both left and right-hand drive markets, and a farmer could hop in from either side. It was abandoned almost immediately, partly because it made hand signals impossible. But it tells you everything about the mindset. This was a tool being designed by engineers at speed with zero interest in convention. Then came the decision that would define the vehicle for the next 7 decades. And it wasn't a design choice at all. It was forced on them. Steel was rationed. Rover couldn't get enough of it, but there was another metal sitting in plentiful supply all over Britain: aluminium. The aircraft industry had used enormous quantities of an aluminium and magnesium alloy called Burma-Bright during the war, and now the war was over, so the new vehicle's body panels would be made of aircraft alloy, and because aluminium was being shaped by hand over simple tooling, the panels had to be flat, and the corners had to be simple. The boxy, upright, flat-sided shape that the world would come to recognize instantly was never styled. It was the cheapest possible way to bend leftover aircraft metal. Even the color was an accident. The early vehicles were painted in military surplus paint. The greens used inside aircraft cockpits because it was what Rover could get. The most famous silhouette in off-road history, in its most famous color, existed because of rationing and Army surplus. On the 30th of April, 1948, the Land Rover was launched at the Amsterdam Motor Show. The price was £450. It had 4-wheel drive, a Rover engine, seats for 3, and almost nothing else. A heater was optional. Doors were basic. The whole vehicle was a rolling admission that comfort had not been considered for a single second. And the plan, remember, was modest. This was a stopgap. Something to keep Solihull busy and earn export currency until Rover's proper business, building saloon cars, recovered. The company assumed it might sell a few thousand a year for a few years. The world had other ideas. Orders came in from everywhere immediately. Farmers bought it. The British Army bought it. Police forces, fire brigades, foresters, and engineers bought it. Export orders flooded in from across the Commonwealth and beyond, which meant steel and materials kept flowing, which meant Rover could keep building. By 1951, 3 years after launch, the temporary product was outselling the Rover's actual cars by 2 to 1. The stopgap had eaten the company. The very first pre-production vehicle, registration HUE166, became known simply as Huey. It still exists today, and it is treated as a national treasure. In 1954, Winston Churchill was given a Series I for his 80th birthday, fitted with an extra wide seat and a heated footwell. The royal family adopted the vehicle almost from the beginning, and the Queen would be photographed driving Land Rovers on her estates for the rest of her life. Something built as a farm tool had become part of the national furniture. Over the decades, the vehicle evolved, but it never really changed. The Series II arrived in 1958, the first version that a stylus was actually allowed to touch. The Series III followed in 1971, the year production peaked at around 56,000 vehicles. And in 1983 came the biggest mechanical leap in the vehicle's life, the Land Rover 110, followed by the 90 in 1984. These took the coil spring suspension pioneered by the Range Rover, the vehicle this channel has covered before, and fitted it to the working Land Rover. The old leaf springs were gone. The shape stayed exactly where it was. And here is one of the strangest facts in this whole story. For its first 42 years, this vehicle did not have a name. It was just the Land Rover. That was the product, and that was the company. You bought a Land Rover the way you bought a tractor. It was described by its wheelbase, an 80-inch, a 90, a 110, and that was all anyone needed. Then in 1989, the company launched the Discovery, a new family 4x4. Suddenly, the word Land Rover meant a whole range of vehicles, and the original could no longer just be called the Land Rover. It needed an identity. So in 1990, the company reached for a word that reflected its decades of military service. Defender. The most famous name in off-road motoring was a piece of administrative housekeeping. The vehicle was middle-aged before it was christened. The Defender carried on for another 26 years after that, essentially unchanged in silhouette. It served with the British Army in the Gulf, in Afghanistan, and in Sierra Leone. It worked with the Red Cross in disaster zones around the world. It was exported to more than 150 countries. And Land Rover has long claimed that for huge numbers of people in remote parts of the world, the first motor vehicle they ever saw was a Land Rover. Each one still took around 56 hours to build, largely by hand, on a production line that had more in common with 1948 than with any modern car factory. That, in the end, is what killed it. The Defender could not meet modern crash and emissions regulations without becoming a different vehicle entirely. In May 2015, the 2 millionth Series and Defender was built by a special team and auctioned for £400,000 with the money going to the Red Cross. And at 9:22 in the morning on the 29th of January 2016, the last one rolled off the line at Solihull, while more than 700 current and former workers stood and watched. Men whose fathers and grandfathers had built the same vehicle on the same line. Some of them cheered, some of them cried. The vehicle itself was a Defender 90 Heritage soft top painted green with a white roof, deliberately specified to look as much like Huey as possible. Its registration read H166HUE. The first one and the last one, 68 years apart, wearing almost the same face. Maurice Wilks died in 1963, so he saw only the beginning of what he had started. He never called himself a visionary. By every account, he was a quiet, modest engineer who wanted a better machine for his farm and could not find one. The sketch in the sand at Red Wharf Bay was washed away by the next tide, but the answer to Spencer's question, "What will you do when the Jeep wears out?" ended up being built more than 2 million times. And that, perhaps, is the real lesson in this story. The Defender became one of the most loved vehicles ever made, and at no point did anyone plan it. It was a stopgap that outlived the company that built it. Its shape came from rationed steel. Its color came from surplus paint. Its name came from a scheduling conflict with another product. One engineer asked a simple question and answered it honestly. Why is there no British vehicle that can do this? It turned out that was enough to put the same truck on every continent on Earth. And if you're new here, subscribe. We cover the full stories behind the British cars that shaped the world.